We kept on the far side of the planet from the phatic flying saucer, but as we banked in, we caught a brief glimpse of it out the portside screen. It was huge, maybe a third larger than the ship we'd fought with the Dependable, and its shape wasn't silly. It didn't put me in the mind of an old movie or comic book or the countless parodies that showed laughable aliens and their absurd ships. No, this phatic saucer was dark and looming, like a predator. I felt my heart pound and my stomach flip. Then, the ship was gone from my view, but it wasn't as easily gone from my mind. Steve was our best pilot, so he was running helm, but he hadn't put extra points into Constitution. Maybe his Ishi toughness would get him through, but we were taking no chances. I was on navigation, and Timrat was just along for the ride, but on a ship like this, any consul could switch over to the helm in an emergency. Our plan required only one of us to remain conscious on the way down. If none of us did, we'd never know, because we'd all be obliterated when we hit the ground. We were all strapped in as tightly as we could manage. I felt my own safety belts almost squeezing the air out of my lungs. The lights and buttons and icons all glared up at me, and I knew if I let my mind wander, I would be terrified by the torturous complexity of them. It was like when you board a plane, and you glance in the cockpit and see all the endless rows of dense, identical switches, and you wonder how anyone can know what they all mean, and possibly understand them. But I did understand the console, and for better or for worse, we were going through with the landing. When I was younger, I loved the TV show Batman the Brave and the Bold, which took its name from a Silver Age comic book that always featured team-ups. Each episode of the animated show would have Batman joining up with some other hero or team, and the whole thing had this silly feeling to it, completely different from the gloomy tone of just about every other Batman comic or movie. I loved the program so much, I went back and collected as many of the old Brave and the Bold comics as I could find. And when I read each issue, I went in with one question. Who was brave, and who was bold? I spent more hours than I'd like to admit trying to tease out the differences between the two. And what I decided was that guys like Superman and Martian Manhunter were brave. They put themselves in danger for the greater good. They were willing to take risks and make sacrifices because doing so was the moral choice. Guys like Green Lantern and the Flash were bold. They were reckless and daring. Sure, they wanted to do the right thing, but their willingness to expose themselves to harm smacked of daredevilry. Like their powers filled them with the urge to take chances. I'd always admired the brave heroes and wanted to be one of them, but I didn't have what it took to be brave. Bravery required true courage. There was a nobility in bravery. And as I prepared to drop down onto that planet, I knew I wasn't being brave. I was being bold. This was reckless. I was taking other kids, the best friend I'd ever had, and a girl I cared about, into the most dangerous situation that I could possibly imagine. And somehow I'd convinced myself that I could do it. Steve looked at his readout panel, which he'd configured to display solar flares. "It's gonna be soon, mate." "Yeah," I said. "Do you feel good about this?" I thought about it, and my answer surprised me. I don't know why, but I do. "Glad to hear it," he said, "'cause I'm scared out of my bleeding mind. Coming up in 3, 2, 1, now!" He throttled the ship forward, and we all lurched back, but the G-force inhibitors kicked in like they were supposed to. We hadn't taxed them out. Not yet, at least. The ship began to buck violently, and the engines whined. Despite being strapped in, I jerked violently in my seat. It was impossible not to feel like we were crashing, like we were doomed. Part of me wanted to panic, but part of me watched with calm disposition, as though this were just a movie, and a boring one at that. I began to wonder if the dread was somehow forced, like a memory of something that had once scared me as a little kid, but didn't mean anything now. Steve worked the panel in a state of near hypnosis. He flicked his tongue, as if the sense of the air could tell him something about the ship's system. Maybe they could, for all I knew. But maybe it was just a nervous habit. "Listen up, sentients," he said as the turbulence increased. Tighten your seatbelts. Then we pivoted towards the atmosphere and throttled hard as we made entry. The shields kicked in, and the main screen showed the heat and fire building up towards our nose, generated by the incredible friction of re-entry at top stupid speeds. The G-force inhibitors were already maxing out, and I could feel pressure in my eyes and sinuses. We were tossed violently, the engine screamed, and I heard the disconcerting sound of metal groaning under stress. "Turn back," I heard Diana moan. I can't do this." I wanted to tell her that she could, but the effort of speaking was too much. Instead, I watched as Steve broke the atmosphere and cut the engines, and we became nothing more than a meteor hurtling with murderous force towards the surface of the strange world. I thought my eyes would literally tear out of my head. I thought my spine would come out of my back. I thought I'd wet my pants, but none of that happened. We fell and fell and fell. Somehow I managed to glance back, and I saw that Charles, me son, and Diana had passed out. They were all bleeding from their noses. I didn't think I was, and Tamret wasn't. Steve made a weird coughing sound, like a failed attempt at speech, tried to raise an arm, and he blacked out too. Tamret managed to nod at me, and I switched my console to helm, while she switched hers to navigation. And we were still falling. There was nothing but pain and pressure and the feeling of being torn apart. I envied Steve in his oblivion, and I kind of longed for it, but I couldn't quit on my friends. I couldn't ask Tamret to do what I wouldn't. I stayed there. I made myself stay and focus and fly the plummeting death trap that was our ship. Then the console chimed, signaling it was time for us to come out of the dive to save our lives. But I couldn't do it. I was too far gone. I couldn't lift my arm or make my hand move or think about anything but the incredible pain and how if we struck the surface, everything would end. I was giving up. I was going to let us all die. Except I wasn't. As if looking at someone else's actions through my own eyes, I saw my hands working the controls. I didn't recall making the decision, but I was already in mid-action. The engines were firing and I was leveling out the ship. A doubting voice in the back of my mind told me I'd waited an instant too long. But somehow I knew that wasn't true, because we were turning hard and fast, and then we were no longer vertical. I was afraid I'd overcompensated, but we leveled out, and there we were, skimming along 200 feet above a rough and rugged landscape of unfamiliar brush and rock and sand. Alien vistas tumbled past in a blur of color. There were great purple and pink things like trees with vines twisting out of thick stalks, waving in a breeze like giant seaweed. And there was grass, actual green grass, but a strange shade of darker green. Herds of quadrupeds ran from us, and things like monkeys scattered from the vine trees. And above it all, zipping along about 700 miles an hour, was me. Next to me was my unconscious pal, and next to him, Tamret, who looked at me and didn't say anything. Which was just fine, because her approving gaze was exactly what I needed. Steve opened his eyes.
You stepped in for me, mate?
Yeah,
You think I'm a tosser for blacking out?
a little bit, I said. How do you feel?
Bloody awful, but surprisingly less bloody awful than you'd suppose. Maybe because we're not actually dead.
Oh, that was the worst, Diana cried from the back.
We can never do that again.
The adrenaline was coursing through her. I knew because it was coursing through me. We'd lived through something no human body should be able to survive. Now we were flying fast. Really, really fast, which seemed like a good reason to be concerned. But Steve was on top of it, and already working the console. He wiped at his bloody snout with the back of his hand, and then proceeded to call up something on one of the screen.
Veer 10 degrees to the east and then straight ahead for about 1,200 miles.
I watched as Steve made the course correction, and I felt someone's furry hand touch my cheek.
Nice flying,
Tamret whispered in my ear.
You can do anything. And you know what that means?
That you were right and I was wrong?
Exactly.